I saw a bigger one yesterday. You going to the social club?
No, my flight is at around 10 o'clock.
Ah, okay.
So I have to leave just after the beer.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
We should get you whiskey, so.
Yeah. To get me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to leave the hotel at 6 in the morning.
6 in the morning? Are you flying out of Haneda or Narita?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. I think I ordered a taxi.
Oh, you did?
I think.
Okay. Yeah.
It involved like a Google Translate conversation with the receptionist.
Yeah, they don't speak English very well.
Well, to be fair, I think they do, but I suspect that's not the person they have on at 6 in the morning.
Oh, okay.
So. Yeah, but I think I'm okay. I think if the taxi doesn't turn up, I still have time to get a train to Haneda.
The ACE chairs remote. I still don't see
And
them.
it's Daniel and who?
Daniel and Logan, but I don't see them.
No, I guess they don't quite have to turn up just yet.
Okay. Yeah. Let's get started.
Okay, good morning. This is the joint session with Lake and ACE, sharing the session time. We start with Lake. My name is Stephen Farrell. I'm one of the co-chairs of Lake. And this is Malicious, my co-chair, who did all the work for this meeting. So he's going to do all the work today.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, so thank you everyone for showing up. As a reminder, this session is being recorded and the presence is logged. And the note well applies as for any other IETF meeting. Please, as Stephen said, we will be sharing the session with ACE, and we will be organized as follows. So the first hour of the slot will belong to Lake, and the second hour will be devoted to the ACE session. So I still haven't seen the ACE chairs signing up, but hopefully they will be there later. So yeah, just some meeting tips for this session to make it successful. Make sure to sign in to MeetEcho so that we log your presence in the virtual blue sheets. Use the MeetEcho to join the mic queue and keep audio and video off if not using the on-site version. Please wear masks unless you are actively speaking. So here are some links. Here are some links for today: the agenda, the MeetEcho link, the notes, and Zulip. So we have one note taker. This is Marco. Marco, can you confirm? Yeah. Okay. Can we have someone help Marco with notes before we proceed?
As soon as I'm done with breakfast, I'll chip in.
Okay. Thank you, Christian. So the notes link is here on this slide. It's on this slide, and it's also available in the data tracker. So with that, I would like to skip to the official part of the Lake meeting. And we have a quick update with something that I followed on Twitter recently. There was a real world crypto symposium in Tokyo that is being held in parallel with the IETF. And I know there was a talk by Mark Ilunga who did the computational analysis of ad hoc signature method. And I noted this tweet where he essentially praises the working group for highly welcoming the security analysis during the formal analysis stage and the inputs. And Mark and his co-author published a paper on their security analysis work recently. Yes.
So, and just to advertise, then we have a new research group in the IETF looking at formal methods and how to make them more usable for things like this and for other things. So if you're interested in that, then I'm helping co-chair that. So please jump in there.
All right. So in terms of the Lake agenda for today, here is a proposal. So first we will start, I mean, this is part of the administrivia. We will have an update on ad hoc and traces draft. John will be giving an update on the discussions regarding ad hoc rekeying, an item that is up for rechartering, that is not, that is up for rechartering. And then we will have an update on the Lake HOTS draft. And finally, we will wrap up with the open discussion on the Lake recharter, as we have advertised on the list the latest draft of the new Lake charter. This is available on the list, so I hope people have had time to read it. Does anyone want to bash this agenda? Yes, Joran?
Yeah, I have a proposal for the fourth item on the agenda, simplifying the deployment. I think we should skip that discussion to give more time to the rekeying and the chartering.
Okay.
If that's, I mean, I could tell you what it's all about, but it's not really baked yet. So we can get back to that, I think.
Okay, so the proposal is to skip the discussion on Lake HOTS draft and to give more time for the rechartering. Yes.
That sounds great. Just one note, that we have this transcription thing. So again, if you can remember to say your name at the mic, some form of your name will land in the automatically generated transcript, and it might be amusing later.
Yes.
Another thing. Could we take John's presentation a little bit later, like 10 o'clock? Is that possible?
Okay. So your proposal is to have the recharter discussion before?
Yes.
So we start with ad hoc traces, go on with the recharter, and then have John at the very end.
If that's okay.
Yes, sure.
Otherwise, John might not show up before 10 o'clock, so that's
okay. Sure.
Only one reason.
Okay. All right. Does anyone else want to bash this, or we sustain the proposal as it stands now? Okay. So I propose we get started with the first item of today. This is the update on the ad hoc draft and the traces. Ad hoc and traces share. Joran, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, so good morning, everyone. I think we feel pretty ready with ad hoc. So there's just a few things I'd like to bring up today. Please go to the next slide. So since the last meeting, we had 2 new versions, one coming up right after IETF115, basically going through the final wrap-up of the working group last call, and then we had one version 19 before an interim meeting where we covered all the directorate reviews so far, also Shepard review and Stephen's pre-last call review. So the GitHub master now looks essentially like version 19. But I'll anyway like to just go through these the changes in 18 and 19 in a little bit more detail. And the traces draft is now also updated, so it matches 19. So I think this is pretty stable, and yeah, so that's just a few things. Next slide, please. Next slide. So just reminding you of the changes, the main changes to the format was the pad field being removed in version 18. So padding can now be done with the use of external authorization data, just using the labeled 0. We also revised the EAD syntax and made the value optional. That's also to support different lengths of padding. And then there were a lot of terminology, and there were a lot of clarification, some terminology alignment in the document. This is more like editor stuff, and so have a look at the changelog. So then two more slides ahead. So what we did in the last version was, based on comments, there was a note on discrepancy between terminology used in this draft and the draft which specifies how to use ad hoc with OSCORE. So we made this text a little bit stricter normative here, and about, it shouldn't say the use, it should be say how to use OSCORE. We had a comment about message correlation. There was an entire appendix, or entire sort of half-a-page appendix, which we could simplify by writing a short section 341. And there is also an example state machine, which was requested at the IETF 115. And again, there were a lot of clarifications done based on our review comments. And the final slide now is showing the state machine, initiator, and the responder. So that's it. We think we are done, but we have of course, as always, comments coming in. Next slide. Next slide. So Brian Sipos was reviewing this, and he requested a new error code. So error codes are things that you can specify afterwards. You don't have to do it in the document, but this was a good proposal, so we might want to include it. So the basic idea was that when you send when you authenticate, you include an identifier to the credential you're using, and that might be the credential itself, or it might be just an identifier. And sometimes you don't have the referenced identifier, and that he thought would be a nice error code to provide some information about try another credential. So, and the typical case here where this is actually very useful if you have one constrained device which is talking to multiple, it's a server having multiple clients, and these credentials are so large that the constrained device can't store all of them. So it might even store just one of them. And then it needs to flush out the old credentials. And so when client number 1 appears after client number 2 has already flushed out his credential, then and client number 1 then only uses the reference because it thinks the server has the credential, then this error message can indicate that I no longer have your certificate chain, for example, or certificate or public key. So that we think was a good proposal, a good idea, and the proposal is in PR 401, which is adding then a new error code here. Generally, we said around errors, which we discussed many meetings ago, that we should only pre-register error codes that can trigger autonomous actions from the devices. So errors that means that you need to, I mean, it's not supported method, for example, it's nothing we can really solve. If you don't implement the method, then you have to sort of update the code to do that. But things that trigger autonomous actions are meaningful according to this previous reasoning. So that's what we are including in the protocol now. Any comments on this? Anyone had a chance to look at it? No, I don't see no hands here. Okay.
So I think the mailing list discussion was positive generally. So
yeah. So please comment this on the mailing list or on the GitHub. That's fine, I suppose, as well. Stephen likes emails. So yes. Okay.
So, no, but this looks like something that makes sense to merge whenever the right moment arises.
Okay. So do you propose that we should get an explicit acknowledgement on the mailing list before including it, or should we? Okay. Simple enough. Okay. So unless there are any objections, we'll include this. but please have a look, and you could just note, say that I've looked and it looks okay. Okay, next. All right, here's another one, also related to errors. So Marco has been implementing a lot here. He noted that it might be useful, even though we said we shouldn't specify too many errors because if they're implementation dependent and so application dependent, that should allow people to set their own errors unless they are generic. And here's one which might be generic: is if you have EAD related errors, that's somehow out of scope of ad hoc, because ad hoc is just to improve a possession really of private key. But if you have for example, if you have multiple EADs going on in parallel, then it might be useful to bring information back about which EAD failed. So basically reusing the EAD label in the error information. And here is an example of an error information that there would then be a specific error code for EAD type labels. So yeah, the question is basically, should we do this, or should we just treat EAD application errors like any other applications? So you register and you specify it and you register, and then you ask for a code point. Christian.
By the criterion you mentioned before, I don't think this should go into the specification because it's not actionable. If it were actionable, that EAD could have been non-critical in the first place.
Good point. So what you're saying is that that's the designer of the EAD application should make sure that this either make an application specific or make sure that this won't happen.
The designer or the sender. If the sender is willing to not send that option instead, then it could have made it non-critical. And if it insists on that option being processed, then it also expressed that.
Yeah, I thought that was a good point. Anyone else? I see nodding in the room. Okay, so please continue the discussion. Christian, could you fill in the GitHub here with this statement, your comment?
Yep.
Thanks. Any other comments on this? Okay, next slide. And there was a third comment about protected errors, and I'll leave that to the next slide, which is a more general discussion about how do we allow client and initiator and responder to handle keys, handle the exporter and keys derived from the exporter. So this is a little bit older issue which we haven't really completed, and the starting point here is that, let's say that you have message 3 being sent by the initiator, and then all the key material is in place. You have the derived PRK out, so you can use the exporter. And at this point, when the receiver receives message 3, it may also use ad hoc exporter, and it may decide that, well, ad hoc is complete. But I still don't want to talk to you. I mean, so it's basically authentication without authorization. And the responder can then send an error message. And since we have exporter up and running, we could protect that error message with the key derived from PRK out. So this is possible, and this is something that's done in TLS to protect alert messages. And the general question is, should we allow that? Should we not allow that? We are not clear basically on how you use the exporter. We state currently that if there is an error, then you flush the context and you tear down the session. So that's in general, and in general we need to have something stated in this document, and then we have in particular when this is used with OSCORE, and there we have a clear statement saying that ad hoc error messages after ad hoc message 3 are not protected with OSCORE, and which has been discussed in the core working group this week. So that's basically the state of things. We have a starting point in PR 398. It's a little bit like a corner case. What do you do when you fail after you have completed the protocol, so to speak? And I think that we need more clarifications here. So a discussion would be good either in this meeting or as we process this PR. I think this is the only thing where we actually need some more reasoning for the time being. So anyone wants to bring this up now or have a look at PR 398? I see someone rising, but not for the purpose of reaching for the mic. So I don't think this is the case. Okay, so yes, please have a look at the PR. We need to complete this. Next slide. How am I doing time-wise?
We should have plenty of time. So
okay. And this is a recent PR, appeared yesterday or the day before yesterday. This is a note about the new COSI header parameters. So what ad hoc is allowing you to transport a lot of different kind of credentials. You don't need to use certificates. You can use identifiers of various sort, but you need to describe what you're doing, and that you do with means of a COSI header. So we've added COSI header parameters, or we added new, and we propose to add new entries in COSI for CWT, CBOR Web Tokens. You can use those for authentication, or something we call CCS. So CWTs are defined in RFC 8392. And in that same RFC, it's also defined what's meant by a CWT claims set, which is basically the CWT. It's the content without this COSI wrapping. So it's the actual payload or the actual body. And we define then COSI header parameters for both CWT and CCS, and they are called KCWT and KCCS. CCS are used for raw public keys. It's a well-defined format for raw public keys used in Lake. But we don't talk much about how you use CBOR Web Tokens or all these raw public keys in the protocol. And there, John thought that we should actually write some security considerations. I think that's a good idea. So in particular, the case of transporting a raw public key, then obviously you need to have some other means of verifying the key. Otherwise, this would be purely opportunistic or trust on first use. So the security consideration should be added. Any comments on that?
it seems non-controversial. So.
No, it seems non-controversial, yeah.
So,
yep.
Can you just go back one?
Yep.
I just had a quick look at 398.
Yep.
And I'm not entirely clear what change it's proposing. Could you just summarize that? That might help people.
So it's supposed to summarize. First of all, it's not done. that's the statement on the last part. But what it's supposed to clarify is how do you handle the case that when you have derived when you have completed the session, what can you do with the derived key material?
Okay, but 398 is only just clarifying, it's not trying to change.
No.
Okay, that was what I was
wondering. Right, yeah. No, this is a missing part, I think. It's like a corner case. We have sort of this general statement about any error leads to tearing down.
Sure, but yeah, so I guess the point is that 398 is just trying to clarify the situation. It's not trying to change it to introduce new ways of encrypting errors.
No, rather the contrary.
Great, thanks.
Good comment, thank you. Okay, and I think that was it from all the issues, unless there have been appearing some issues tonight. So next slide, please. Okay, so we think we are done. we are waiting for Paul and for the last call, of course. I have some industry feedback from that also. Some people want to deploy this in products soon, so we're happy for any progress here. And then we have updated the traces, so that's now in phase with the document, and none of the things in this few issues remaining are impacting the traces. So we think that's also ready. Might be something that we want to proceed with. And that's it.
Okay, so what I hear is that Lake Traces is ready for working group last call. Essentially, it's in lock with. Should we wait AD's review on ad hoc before proceeding with working group last call to keep?
Yeah, could make sense. Or Paul is nodding, saying, or shaking.
So just we move it forward. Okay. Okay, so let's move forward the traces draft. We will start the working group last call on the list and 2-week last call, and confirm on the list how we proceed with the draft.
So just to check, I mean, how many people have verified the traces? Do we know?
2.
I have
2 or 3?
so on my side, I verified 1 trace. And
Marco's written the traces.
I assume
and Marek has confirmed that he has looked at both traces.
Okay, great.
But did you look at the EDDSA trace as well?
No,
okay.
Just the second trace.
So Marco confirmed he looked at this first as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So at least 2 then for, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Aaron.
You might want to switch back the agenda order now.
Yes, I saw John walking in. The next item on the agenda, I propose we stick to the original proposal since John is here. John, do you want to give the presentation on Reking now, or? Okay. Yeah.
So this is about ad hoc keying and PSK authentication. Next slide. So PSK authentication and resumption were originally discussed, but then not pursued to keep things more slim. The interest also failed in PSK a little bit when it was known that you could do asymmetric, basically the same message size. Now, Rafael brought up the use case again and said he wanted a more lightweight resumption mechanism. And still the most flexible way to achieve this is to do like TLS 103. You have a PSK authentication method that can be used for resumption. Then you also get you can use it with external PSK. So you get 2 things in one. Recent discussions in TLS working group, very much driven by me, is to discourage this the PSK key exchange method without forward secrecy and increase the requirements and guidance on fingerprinting and tracking of PSK identifiers. I think a new PSK method in ad hoc should provide ephemeral key exchange, and it should protect against identity protection, tracking, and fingerprinting. But due to synchronization issues and computational limitations, you might have to accept something slightly worse than that, but probably we can do something quite good. Next. This is just a slide illustrating that how you do key exchange very much affect how vulnerable you are to static key exfiltration. We can take next. The suggestion would be to high-level suggestion would be to register a new fault message where both parties authenticate with a PSK. The benefits of this is, compared to the current method, is that it requires, if you have Diffie-Hellman, it requires 1 asymmetric operation compared to 3 in the current methods. Maybe even more important is that it eliminates everything external, like fetching keys from databases, doing revocation and path validation. That might be, if you have some external database, that might be much more heavy and time consuming than the asymmetrical operations. And most of the remaining information is taken directly from the mailing list. The discussion there with the link there. Next. Here is high level how a PSK method should look like. You need a PSK identifier in message 1, and then you don't need any ID cred I and ID cred R in message 2 or 3. The ID cred, the PSK identifiers is all the identifiers you need. Then you need to add the PSK to the key derivation, and what was discussed last time, which was approved by CFRD, was to add it to the salt. So you need to, now we have TH2 there, so you would need to mix them together somehow. For example, like that, but that's just an example. Then you need the derive keys, and as Charlie pointed out on the list, you should probably should not have all the keys the same like there is in the static Diffie-Hellman method, because then it becomes a MAC oracle. It would be quite simple, I think, to derive them differently. That maybe Charlie can have a suggestion for later. And then if you don't start with an external PSK, then you need to derive a PSK somehow, or send a PSK. One option is to derive a PSK, a random one with a EDOC KDF, something like that. And that's then only needed if you start with an asymmetric method, otherwise the PSK can likely be reused. But this is just very high level comments. Formal verification and analysis will show what we need to do and cannot do. Next. Different options. One thing we can do with the PSK is to add a MAC or an AAD to message 1. An AAD enables encryption, but the only thing you can encrypt is basically CI, the connection identifier, and EAD1, which hopefully should be encrypted in its own. It protects from stopping an attacker creating a new message 1, but an attacker can still replay an old message 1. Then how can we provide integrity protection and mitigate tracking and fingerprinting? If you reuse the PSK identifier several times, you can do tracking and fingerprinting. There's several things we can do better than that, but a problem is if things get out of sync. There's always someone that has sent the last confirmation message that can be lost. First thing to not, at least you should have something privacy friendly. You should not send your email address here that can identify. You should be something anonymous. And then you should hopefully not reuse it. And how can you stop reuse? You can, in TLS, you can send a new ticket every time and then only use it once. Here, the suggestion is that we would do something similar, but we just derive a PSK identifier with a KDF. A random one, maybe 64 byte. Then you to not get collisions or low probability of collisions. If you have a MAC on message 1, then you have the option that the receiver can actually try several keys and find the right one. So then you can have the random identifier smaller, maybe 16 bits, 24. Then instead of deriving, you could send an new identifier in message 2. TLS 103 sends the new identifier in message 4 or after message 3. Benefit with this is that the PSK identifier can be smaller. The disadvantage is that it increases message 2, which is the one we don't want long, but potentially as you remove ID cred R, you could send a similar size identifier there and still be 45. And the last point, if you have a MAC or AAD, the receiver could simply try all the MACs it have, at least if they are internal. It doesn't have to be fetched from a database. Checking a MAC is much cheaper than asymmetric, typically 2 to 3 orders. So checking something like 50 MACs is still much cheaper than doing an asymmetric operation. Next. Then, as pointed out on the list, you can combine PSK in asymmetric in different way, but probably not worth doing. It's illustrated. You can read about it in this mail. And then comments on this from Charlie. Charlie says, should we limit the number of suits? That could be discussed later. TLS do something like that. It binds the PSK to a specific hash function to stop that you use it in same PSK in several MACs. Should be evaluated. Charlie pointed out that we need to be careful for selfie attacks, and this was something that was discussed when Edward Hack had a PSK method. There's several different ways you can protect against that. Charlie points out that if the PSK was derived in a post-quantum secure way, then also using it with Diffie-Hellman and combining will probably also be quantum resistant. And this applies to the external PSK, not to the internal. They will not be quantum resistant. If you start with an asymmetric and just do resumption, you don't get quantum resistant. Raphael pointed out that suggestion for doing things even more slim. He asked, can we have a 2-message resumption? It's not PSK authentication, just resumption. What you don't get then is that you don't get aliveness and peer awareness. Question is, do you always need them? I don't have an answer for that. He suggests that you do a 2-way message like TLS. TLS doesn't have any random numbers or Diffie-Hellman. That could be added to a 2-message exchange. Then Rafa asks, is identity protection a must, or could you, for example, start with an asymmetric and then have some resumption where you reuse the identifier for a short while to make things slimmer? And that's probably possible. For example, Quick do allow reuse of its connection identifier. So what you could limit is do it for a short time. Maybe you want to be at the same location, and maybe you want to use the same access. But that's up for discussion. I think that was the last slide.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then I guess is this something the group should do? The future, I don't know. Any high-level questions or
any comments? Or, yeah. Okay,
more detailed discussions?
Yeah, we'll come to the charter discussion later, but I just want to say that this is also useful in the ad hoc OSCOR profile of ACE, where we have a resumption we need to look at resumption, and currently we only have, I mean, after the, I will talk about it later, so
Yeah.
we'll get back to it. Yeah.
Thanks for joining the queue, Scott.
One advantage that PSK allows is it can be is potentially post-quantum if given a long PSK. The only other way to do post-quantum is to do something like Kyber, which goes against the idea of lightweight.
Yeah.
Do we have any other comments from the remote people? Scott joined the queue. Scott?
No, he was leaving. I had bumped him anyway.
Oh,
Okay, so I guess this is going to be an item for possible recharging, right?
Yeah, I guess we can discuss that more in the rechartering. It's more technical details, what could and could not be done.
thank you, John.
Thanks, Sean.
Yes, with that, we seem to have finished the presentation part, and we can now open the floor for the discussions on the recharter. So I recently posted the draft version of the Lake recharter to the mailing list. I'm wondering if people have had time to read this through. There is a lot of work that has been proposed, so it's important that we discuss before moving this forward. There is the item that John presented on ad hoc rekeying. There are several applications on the use of EAD points, external authorization data points. There is a proposal on the implementation guidance draft, and as well there is work proposed by Christian on essentially on using grease methods in Greece for using the grease methods for as another extension to EADs. Yes, sir.
I can do that now. I'll do it. I hope so.
Okay, can you share?
Okay. 1 second. Chrome screen. Okay.
Okay.
Is that big enough in the room, or?
Yeah.
Maybe not. Dan, is that visible from back there?
Sorry?
Is that visible enough back there?
No.
Okay.
So yeah, the charter has been rewritten. Essentially, it's focusing on ad hoc now and make as the base protocol specification referencing it as the main item and the extensions to it. Okay, you seem to have Japanese letters. Cool.
Oh, that's your Google stuff.
Okay. Yeah, so I wonder how many people have read the draft charter before we go into the discussion. Can we see a raise of hands in the room? So I see 2.
So it's probably worth you scroll through it. Christian?
So I
sorry,
see
who's in the
people.
queue? Sorry.
Oh.
Carson's in the queue.
Okay,
Oh,
yeah.
they're raising their hand.
Yeah, so I didn't. Yeah.
Here's a new technique. Rickard, did you want to speak, or are you raising your hand?
Yeah, I was all to say I read the charter.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So I forgot to start to trigger the tool on Miteco. It's okay. So do we have any comments? First of all, does anyone object the charter as it stands now? Do we have any comments on it? Please join the queue.
So I guess since so few people have read it, maybe just flick through and say, like, here's what each paragraph does.
Okay, so we have 5 people raising their hands.
So let me just bring up the okay, so
Yeah.
So So why don't you just describe like roughly what you're saying?
Okay.
It's on there.
Yeah, so the first paragraph is just summarizing ad hoc, stating what has been done, noting the security analysis and the use cases as we've been seeing from Narrowband IoT, Sixtish, and LoRaWAN. The second paragraph is on the primary usage, technical usage of ad hoc to key OSCORE. And why we were doing all this to have to minimize the code footprint and the message sizes in OSCORE implementations. The third paragraph is saying that essentially, we completed the initial goal of specifying ad hoc, that we will continue on working on the traces draft until that is done, and then it goes on and gives kind of the rationale for the following paragraphs that are introducing the new work. So this paragraph is saying that we ruled out authentication based on pre-shared keys in the first. Could you go back, Stephen? That we ruled out authentication based on pre-shared keys in order to streamline the activities of the working group at the beginning. This is documented in the requirements draft, and now we see, it goes, each paragraph, following paragraph goes and introduces the new work. So the first work item is ad hoc rekeying, what John has been presenting. Then there is the draft, or there is a paragraph on EAD items and three use cases that were brought up to the working group that were presented in the previous meetings. These are third-party assisted authorization of ad hoc, remote attestation of ad hoc, peers using the work from the RATS working group, essentially carrying the attestation information in the EAD items. And then there is the third use case, is the status verification of ad hoc authentication credentials. For example, using OCSP stapling, which is one draft that has been, which is one work item that has been brought up. So then there is a paragraph on the work item that relates to the coordination of and the use of ad hoc application profiles and the definition of a well-known application profile. So this was proposed by Marco. And processing, and then also processing extensions through ad hocs extension points in order to include what was being proposed on the list by Christian and the use of Greece in ad hoc. And finally, there is a sentence on including the work on implementation guidance for the protocol. Yeah, and what follows is just the old charter from the current charter. Yeah, I can see without plus.
Yeah, moving it doesn't help.
Yeah.
Okay, you're on.
Here on Selander. So I think this it's sort of good points here, and we've seen them all. I just wanted to highlight a little bit about the EAD part, the EAD fields. And so I think we got a question at some point from the working group about, will this go on forever? There will always be new extensions, right? Is that really what this working group should do? And I think that that's not the case. I mean, other working groups, as they need, can define EAD fields. So that's nothing that we should need a working group for, really. But these, I think, some of these points here, I mean, I'm biased, of course. I'm authoring one of them, but some of them are actually things that we need to do in this working group because they are sort of generic mechanisms that we'd like to do things like be able to do revocation, the last point, for example. We like to do that efficiently. So I think that deserves to be part of the new charter. Remote attestation also makes very much sense for IoT devices. And then we had the third-party authorization, which is something, an ultra-compact type of zero-touch. So I think these are motivated to keep on working on in this working group. Thank you.
Thank you, Göran. So we have Rickard next in the queue.
Thank you. So yeah, I had a look at the proposed new charter text, and yeah, overall, I think it makes sense and it does go in a good direction. I mean, going back to John's presentation, it does seem good to add an ad hoc keying protocol, and thus also enabling this support for symmetric keys for authentication, including for the first-time key establishment. And in addition to that, I think it makes sense to focus on the use cases for the ED, for the ad hoc ED at this point, because there's a lot of interesting use cases in a good direction. And yeah, I think also a document about the implementation considerations, that's always nice to have. I mean, it helps implementers and it can avoid easy errors or help them avoid any more issues than they need to face. So I think, yeah, overall, I think it goes in a good direction.
Thank you, Rickard. So, Marco, do you want to comment?
Marco Tiroca, just to confirm, I read the charter or the new proposed charter. I confirm I'm interested in all these items. I think they're good. I can contribute to those, possibly drive some of those.
Okay, great. Thank you, Marco. So we had a comment from Karsten quoting the text, the working group will specify how to use EAD fields. And the comment is that this sounds like we'll have the monopoly for that. This was not an intention in the draft, so we will take an action item to rephrase that text. So Karsten is in the queue. Karsten?
Sorry, waiting for the audio. It not only means that we will have the monopoly on that, it also means that anybody who wants to use that has to go to the working group to get that specified. And that is definitely not what is intended with these labels. So people who don't know the protocol will take the conclusion that we are now taking up the whole ocean of potential EAD field usages, and that's not what we're trying to do.
Thank you, Karsten. So we'll take an action item to rephrase the text. So we have 7 minutes left. Do we have any other comments on the draft charter?
So how about running a poll again now that people have seen the text, and just ask, how many people think this charter is in a good direction or versus bad direction?
So let me start show of hands.
So I'm not sure if that was audible, but we'd just like to get a feel for how many people think this charter text is heading in the right direction, and then we should stick it into the data tracker and work it through the process, or how many people think it's the wrong direction. And please don't raise your hand if you don't care. So if you care and think it's a good direction, raise your hand. If hit the raise hand button. If you care and think it's a bad direction, please hit the do not raise hand button. If you do not care, hit no buttons. And we have 40 ostensibly in this session in MeetEcho.
We have 11 people raising their hand.
And what's the clashes like? So I guess Mimi is a bit of a slight clash with this, and Quick, not so much. So we're not missing a huge number of people due to conflicts in the IETF process or the IETF session. Okay, so we have 14. It's a reasonable number. It's positive. It's not overwhelming, but I think it's fairly clear that a bunch of those 14 are people who will actively work on things. So that also is positive.
Okay, so let's confirm on the mailing list.
Yeah, but I think the next step is probably to take this charter text and ask our AD to whack it into the data tracker. Now or after ad hoc last call? What's the right thing there? You can probably do it now if you wanted. Okay, so let's do the traces working group last call first, perhaps. And then we'll ask Paul to take this text or the version of the text we have then and kick off the rechartering process in the data tracker. Is that okay? So Paul's nodding to say that seems okay. Yeah. Great. And we convinced somebody else that it's a good idea in the meantime. So great. Thank you. Okay, so I can stop sharing.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So I guess that concludes the discussion on the recharter, and that was the last agenda item for today. So we still have 4 minutes to go before handing it off to Ace. Do we have any other business? There is John joining the queue. John?
Yeah, saw this. Christian mailed out some Greece proposal. Christian is both implementing and I think using the ad hoc protocol also is maybe it would, if Christian could say some words about that. That sounds like something good for the rechartering. If he wants, he has a couple of minutes. I think that would be good.
Yeah, I can say a few words about it, but I think it's on the specification side. It should be quite a small thing. Essentially, it registers no op things that and encourages people to use them when they can afford it and when they are not hitting just the boundaries that ad hoc is designed to fit within. My impression from TLS is that they've made good experience with having those in just to ensure that people will rather take the cheap option of implementing implementing optional EAD items properly rather than having their implementations fail when they encounter optional EAD items. And same with Cipher suits they don't know. If some parties occasionally hit them with unknown Cipher suits, then they will just implement it right rather than erring in a way that is not described in Lake.
But Christian, I have just a clarification point there. So if people implement correctly the ad hoc base specification, is there a value in this work being done? Because my understanding is that it essentially mandates, kind of restates what is already in the base specification on handling the EAD items.
Yeah, so a correct EAD implementation, a correct ad hoc implementation will just do this automatically, at least on the recipient side. But an implementation that adds it can force other implementations to verify the correctness, and this is part of also what drove it in TLS, force middle boxes that might look into EAD to not stumble to not stumble when they see this.
Okay, thank you. John?
Yeah, I was also following the specification. The same thing was true for TLS 1.2, but I think the whole TLS 1.3 deployment and standardization was delayed for like a year because there was middle boxes that assumed things that they shouldn't assume, and TLS 1.3 had to add a lot of legacy stuff to make it look like TLS 1.2. So I think in practice it can be a big problem. People don't implement from the spec. They use Wireshark and then they implement from that, unfortunately.
Okay, so I guess we're at the end of the Lake session, and we'll probably give a minute or two for people to swap over if they have context swapping or to run around or something. And we'll shortly be starting to help the ACE session. So let's pause for 2 minutes so that people do whatever they need to do. Paul? We have slides. Yeah. He says he should be done. Saying yes. Yeah. Okay, I think Daniel will be joining us to run the show for ACE in a second. He's remote, so we'll hang around to help. But I think Daniel will be along in a second. He's currently looking for a camera. So. I guess we can pop up their agenda or something to help them out. Oh, does it have chair slides?
No. No, but I did the note well and kind of.
Yeah, no, I mean just for ACE. I mean.
Oh, for ACE.
Then Daniel doesn't have the chair privileges in this room. So we can.
Yeah, we can.
Oh yeah,
we
sure.
can do that.
Well, no, once he tells us what slide deck, we can give him control. But we have to start it from. Let's see. Agenda. ACE. Did you? Where is the ACE agenda?
It's common with Lake, so it's in the Lake session.
Oh, okay. So it's
under
under our agenda.
All
right. There we go. So I could share that just to give people something to look at. Firefox share.
Hi.
Daniel, hi. So I
Can
just yes, we hear you fine, and we see you. You look happy to be at home and at some odd hour of the morning, I guess. But
it's not yet morning.
Okay. Well, thanks for being up. So myself and Militia are happy to stay here and click whatever buttons you would like us to click.
Okay, right.
But it's over to you. Your show now.
Okay, right. So yeah, I'm just wondering if Paul is willing to say a word about how is the draft progressing or anything about the working group, since one of the reasons we had this meeting was to interact with the AD. So I give you the floor for the time you need.
Paul here. So are you referring to the documents that are currently in the publication requested queue?
No. It's broader than that. Anything you want to say to ACE, but then yeah, I mean, if Coap CMV2 is maybe the one I have in mind also.
So I mean, I'm a little interested to see. So once the current PubRec queue is depleted, if there's more work coming up and what the plans of the working group are to actually put in more new different work, or whether it's thinking of winding down. But I'm hoping to get a feeling from both the participants and the chairs on that. But it's not something you need to commit to now. Like, I'm just getting a feeling for what are we going to do with ACE now that most of our documents are in the PubRec queue. I mean that there's still some documents floating around, right? So
yeah, some few. The way I see that is it's a continuation of the work already done. But that's my feeling, and maybe eDoc aspect are going to open new horizons for that working group, but I don't know. Maybe does Göran want to say something?
So just as a logistics question, we had note takers for Lake, but we did not commit them to also do this session. So I don't know, Daniel, if you want to get somebody to take notes, because I believe Marco is quite involved in the agenda also.
Yeah, so if someone is willing to volunteer for the note taking, that would be great.
Just repeating what John said, that perhaps we should have this discussion after at all other business, any other business. When we've gone through, we will see where we are in different states of different drafts.
Okay,
Does that
right.
make sense?
But in any case, you can also meet Paul outside this session and have a discussion, I think. Okay, right. So let's start with the PubSub profile. If Sigdem is online.
Hello, I'm here.
Hi, Sigdem.
Hello.
Are there slides? Are there slides for this?
Yes, there is.
Oh, you have it. Okay, sorry. You're doing it?
No.
Oh. Okay, that's me then. What is it?
PubSub profile.
Lake. PubSub profile. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Should I pass you control of the clicker? So you should have control of the click of this moving forwards.
Okay, I do have it. Thank you. So I'm going to give a quick update on PubSub profile. This is the version 6. And for this version, Marco has also joined to the co-authors. The document describes how to secure communication for PubSub clients that communicate through a broker. And it mainly focuses on securing communications for co-op PubSub clients. There has been several updates to the document, albeit slower than we first envisioned. And initially, we considered full support for MQTT, but then considering some of the changes that we need to introduce to the document and to stabilize the document, we put that on the back burner and focused on cleaning up the document for co-op first. The document relies on the transport or application layer security profiles of ACE to achieve the communication security, server authentication, and proof of possession for access tokens. When it was last presented, it was IETF110, but it has been updated across the interims, and progress has been given to the working group. And in that last IETF meeting, we were talking about the architectural changes in the document, which I will recap in the next slide. But that has been implemented. The current focus is on more aligning better with key group com, which this document relies on in terms of message exchanges, message formats, and processing. So the work in progress is basically completing the client group communication interface at the KDC for the PubSub clients and satisfying the key group com requirements and options. We are mostly there, but we still have to clean up some of the descriptions to be able to fully satisfy all the requirements. Previously, the document only described authorizations required for joining a group, as well as protecting the communications for group communication. But now, based on the changes to Key Group GOM, we also added additional operations, including removal from the group and group rekeying, which is still in progress in terms of finalizing the descriptions on that. So just to recap the architectural change, then in the new architecture, we moved to a single authorization server. We have a distinct key distribution center. The PubSub clients talk to the broker. And the general flow we expect in the profile is that there could be an optional authorization service server discovery, which is supported in the ACE framework. And then also the PubSub clients can approach the broker to do KDC discovery, which will be supported by the core CoAP PubSub resource discovery. And due to the new changes to the core CoAP PubSub, this is still in progress in terms of finalizing how this will be done. Once the AS and KDC are discovered, we expect the clients to send 2 authorization requests, one for the broker as the audience and one for the KDC. And as the client gets a token for the KDC, it establishes a secure connection to do a join request to its security group or groups. With this join request, it can obtain the keys for the group communication as well as authentication credentials. Here we expect publishers to provide their authentication credentials to the KDC, and proof of possession of that credential needs to be done. And this is described for both cases when the token is passed via the auth-z-info endpoint, as well as if this was exchanged during a DTLS handshake between the publisher and the KDC. Here I've bolded everything that is new or added after the last update in the IETF. Once the group join has been accomplished, we expect the PubSub client to talk to the broker, establishing a secure connection using the token obtained previously, and then protect the payload of its communication using the group symmetric key as well as signing it. So that's the general flow we expect in this document in terms of PubSub communication. So this one discussion point I wanted to bring to the working group is the distinction between an application group versus security group. This point has been made several times. The current draft text distinguishes this application group around topics, PubSub topics, possibly relying on older text in core PubSub, where the topics may have their own subtopics, which may have their own subtopics forming a hierarchy, and we leave it to the application to decide that mapping of topics to the application group, as well as how that application group maps to a security group. At the moment, the assumption in the draft is that a topic is equivalent to an application group that maps one-to-one to a security group. So we note that if a client obtains keying material for a topic, it would be obtaining keying material for any subtopic under that topic as well. And the draft leaves it to the application to do the correct mapping. Now, one consideration is to add this to the security considerations, but it's also possibly a discussion in the working group whether the draft should be more prescriptive around this. And also another point is core CoAP PubSub has been updated, and there is new terms around topic collections versus topic resources and topic configurations, which needs to be better aligned in this draft. The second, once the client knows which application groups and security groups it's part of, it needs to send authorization requests for the KDC and the broker. And at the moment, the draft says there are 2 distinct authorization requests with 2 audiences. The audience parameter is required. There's an optional scope parameter. Again, this is new in the draft. This scope must be of the data model introduced in the draft AIF PubSub GroupCom. And the scopes are an array of scope entries, which are pairs of PubSub topics and PubSub permissions. PubSub topics, we assumed again, one-to-one corresponds to a security group. And then the PubSub permissions describe what role the client is expected to take in that group communication. And this could be for this clients for this profile, could be publisher, subscribe, or read, or delete, which is a new role. And we also added admin, which needs to be set to 0 for the clients for this profile, but to be future-proof in case we want to use the scope for a group management profile. The scope work is not complete. There are 2 proposals under consideration. One is whether the scope should encode the key beneficiary and distinguish between KDC and the broker instead of relying on the audience parameter, and we've considered pros and cons of this approach. The other proposal is the PubSub topic here, correction to the slide, it's not PubSub perm, PubSub topic, including the broker name in addition to the topic name with a delimiter here, given an example as a colon. Again, this is not set on stone to differentiate the same topics hosted at different brokers. So these 2 proposals are under consideration, and we're still weighing pros and cons for this approach. Compared to having a audience parameter signal who the scope is for. Okay, finally, here a correction to the slide, it should be join response. Once the tokens are obtained, the join request needs to be sent to the KDC, and in a join response is expected back. With this joint response, we expect the group's metric key to be shared back to the clients with a base IV defined by the KDC. Here, again, implementing what the working group favored in the last interim, we say now that the KDC assigns a sender ID, unique sender ID to the publisher clients, and then to protect the messages, the nonce now is generated using the partial IV sender sequence number incremented at each message, and then the nonce constructed following the RFC 8613 using the sender ID and the base IV and partial IV. And that are the main changes to the document. There is still a number of iterations that needs to be done to clean up the write-up, to wrap up the work in progress and close the questions raised in discussions. And that's it, and I'm happy to receive questions.
Okay. Hi, Göran Selander here. So I just want to say I'm really happy to see the energy going into this at the same time as there is also energy on the core side with the PubSub draft, which has been laying around for a very long time. So I'm really happy, and I assume you have contacts with the core authors as well. Do you have any plans on joint implementations or testing, or is it just on spec level so far?
At the moment, it's only at the spec level. Marco is keeping us up to date, and I'm following both the GitHub as well as the latest submissions to IETF. So yes, at the spec level, but there should be eventually more, I think, joint work in terms of implementation level as well. So that would be my wish.
Okay, thank you very much.
The question I have is that if we're expecting any joint work, do we expect that draft to be in working group last call in terms of years or months?
It all depends on I think, how the PubSub work is going to go. I think we need to a little bit wait to make sure we align well with them, because there is some changes in terminology, like topic collections, topic resources, topic configurations, topic data. And I think that needs to be reflected better in this draft, especially if you're going to support KDC and resource discovery properly. I think that needs to align really well, as well as that discussion around application group versus group and whether we decide to be more prescriptive about it. I think we need to follow the new terminology introduced in that draft better.
Okay, right. Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
I can see someone in the microphone.
So Daniel, Arikana here. I put myself in the queue.
Okay, yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So yeah, first of all, thanks for doing this. I mean, as one of the co-authors of the PubSub draft, this is super useful. And again, apologies, it took a bit longer than expected to get the base PubSub specification on the core side to this phase. But now with the restructuring, naming things, I think now we have a good base for going forward to have these both two drafts aligned. So definitely, let's work close together and get things implemented and aligned. So more than happy to work together on that. One small thing that was brought up in the core working group was that the configuration parameters, one of them is currently in the base specification, maximum amount of subscribers, potentially even publishers. And the issue raised there was, should that actually be done on the security side? Because of course you cannot control that unless you can securely know how many of those are. So that's one of those items we could synchronize going forward and make sure the right parameters are at the right place.
Definitely. I noted that in your slides, in the PubSub slides as well, and made a note for myself as well for the security part. So yes, definitely.
Excellent. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Arif. That's useful. Any other comment, or should we move to the next presentation now? So I don't see anyone in the queue, so thank you, Signum. I think it's Marco is going to take the mic. So just before I had a look at the document status, and I just wanted to clarify something, that we had the GroupCom draft being moved to the ISG. So this one, I mean, I think we are waiting for Paul to move them forward.
Yes.
And there are also two drafts that are maybe maybe a little bit more isolated. One, which is the CM2 co-app. So this one is a little bit, I mean, we do have some pressure because it's holding some work in labs. And there is also another draft on co-app EP that is also waiting for review. So these are probably the one. I mean, our AD should put some resource on. Okay, right, Marco, please.
Thank you, Daniel. So this is Marco Tiloca. This is a quick update on revoke token notification. Next slide, please. Right, quite a lot happened since the London meeting. This was also discussed in two asynchronous meetings end of last year and early this year. We in fact submitted the version 4 before the cutoff, addressing all the open points we had and we discussed. We managed to have and complete a working group last call on this version 4, for which we got 2 reviews from Marco Rasori and Richard Höglund, and thank you very much for that. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to touch very quickly on the update summary on the version submitted before the cutoff. There is now a much clearer and I hope a simpler description of what the practical benefits are and the specific actions are in handling the access tokens, thanks to the help coming from the token hashes on the different parties involved, especially discussing the tricky case of very late posted tokens with the XC claim. We have also extended the security consideration and now also better structured in subsections editorially, and with two new points around that. And as I had demanded for a while, we have also introduced a new appendix summarizing and putting in relation with one another the different parameters used by the AES in the spec. Next slide, please. Right, we finally added also a more example that we're missing when using the diff query mode, especially with the cursor extension, and all the appendices now, all the examples now are also collected in a dedicated appendix. We had around for a while a possible conditional attribute usable as query parameter defined in a core document that we have now phrased here just as an example to control the behavior of the AES in terms of sending upside notifications, and that also has the nice side effect that the document is now an informative reference simply. And then, of course, a number of usual clarifications and editorial improvements. Next slide, please. Okay, which brings us to the working group Pascal reviews. Most important, these were very good comments, but all in all related to a number of clarifications and minor fixes, and nothing really related to the core mechanics of the protocols and these properties. So I don't really have any controversial issues or outstanding open points to discuss here today, but just for the reference, this is the summary of the main comments that were brought up, and again, mostly about requested clarifications. And I'll work on those for the next version. Next slide, please. Which is really the next step. It's about producing version 5, addressing all the last call comments from the two reviews. That's all I have on this document. Thank you.
So do we have any comment? Because my understanding is that as soon as we have that version ready, it's going to be sent to Paul for the AES with a request for publication.
I think we were still waiting for an author to confirm that it's really fine to be an author. That should be Ludwig, as you mentioned on the list. Then we need a shepherd. I don't know if we have one already. I hope worst case it can be one of the chairs.
Yeah, that we can deal with.
Great.
So maybe next presentation?
Indeed. So that would be Oscar GM admin. Thank you. Yes, well, an update on Oscar GM admin now in its version 8. Next slide, please. I prefer to bring up a usual recap here. This is an admin interface on the ASCII Group Con KDC, acting as Oscar Group Manager specifically, for which the document defining the interface for candidate group members was sent to the ISG recently. But this is another document on the same Oscar Group Manager defining instead the interface for administrator. So to create, configure, and delete the Oscar groups, and is currently supported interaction with the group manager in link format and CBOR or in Corel instead. So the idea is to have a resource as a collection of groups that can be interacted with in order to create the specific group configurations that can be in turn checked, edited, and so on. So clearly here, the administrator for the groups is the ACE client, while the group manager is acting as resource server. Next slide, please. Since London, this draft also was brought up a couple of times at the recent ACE interim meetings we had. We submitted a new version 8 before the cutoff, I believe, addressing, though I wasn't sure we could do that, but we made it all the open points that were raised during the interim meetings. And I'll have a dedicated slide about that. We are going to make what we agreed to do, meaning a split of this document into two. Well, I'll come back to that later. Next slide, please. So as a summary of updates, in the same spirit of something started a few versions ago on admitting multiple administrators for a same group, now there's additional text to discuss how to properly handle the case of multiple concurrent administrators for the same group. We realized that the number of operations of some of the resources have to happen atomically as practically involving different resources at the group manager, and now that is also defined, but it's pretty simple. We noticed that there are additional side effects that was already defined in case some particular updates happen on the group configuration in terms of availability of public keys of the other group members, if these have to be re-uploaded on the group manager, for instance, following a change in the signature algorithm in the group. And then we noticed another possible situation deserving an error code that we had defined and registered in case the group manager is really asked to do something to create or update the configuration of a group when something the group manager itself doesn't support is involved. Next slide, please. Right, on the use of Coral, that was a major overhaul in the sense that we first gave some more details that we found that were missing on the format of the message payloads and the interaction semantics, but most important, with revised all examples, finally, that was in the queue for a while, so that they are now written as they should be in CBOR diagnostic notation using also packed CBOR, and we have a dedicated appendix with the shared item tables used for that. We also had only one paragraph only up to now on security considerations. Now we have a proper section touching on the different aspects that we believe should cover. And then, of course, clarification and editorial fixes. Okay, next slide, please. Right, this is about the document split. This shouldn't really be new if you have followed the previous interim meetings and also the call on the list. But again, the proposal was to avoid any delay to this document due to the progress of the Coral document in core, which is now right now a normative reference for this ACE document. So the proposal was to split this document into two. A so-called doc1, which would be the current document minus any Coral-related content, and then to start a second new doc2 as a working group document, which would basically be the Coral-related content taken out from this document, and of course with all the necessary editorial content around it to make it still a self-standing document. So this was brought up early this year at an interim meeting where there was no objection. It was discussed in the list where there was no objection. It was further confirmed at another interim meeting. So I'm confident there's consensus on it now. And we agreed also to do the split after this meeting. So I can do that. I can start doing that in April already. We also agreed on the document name. It's just the same one plus dash Coral. Next slide, please. So as next steps, I'll mostly work on the split. I'll create a doc2. Then again, this is not straightforward because intentionally the Coral-related content now is very well blended on this document. So I have to carefully take it out and make a new doc2 as a self-standing document. I'll submit it. And I mentioned that before, doc2 is really not intended to obsolete or update doc1 in any sense. It's supposed to just provide something new and parallel. I'll polish doc1 then to be sure everything is consistent after the removal, double check its consistency with other ACE and core documents, polish it, that will become version 9. And if no outstanding issues come up and nothing seems to be missing, I believe that version 1 may be approaching working group last call. We'll see. And that should be my last slide on this. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Marco. Yeah, that's the non-curl document should be, in my mind, should be sent to working group last call and probably to the IHT before next IETF meeting.
It should be doable, yes.
Yeah.
And a quick note of the new core document, I checked already, sorry, with the current co-authors of, well, Doc 1, so to say. So me and Richard will also co-author the new core document. Francesca and Peter prefer not to. So it should be 2 authors for sure for now.
Okay. Great. Any question, any comment? Though I think it's something we discussed already pretty much during the interim meetings. So if we have no question, maybe we can jump to the next presentation.
I have a suggestion in terms of agenda bashing. Maybe it's better if Göran takes the presentation of the ad hoc profile now, and then I can take after that the follow-up presentation, if it works for you.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Yes.
Is that it?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So this is a new draft, and since was adopted last meeting, and now we have a version 1, which is just a minor update. And the purpose of this presentation is actually to discuss an overall question about the flows in the ACE framework and in the profiles. So, but we have some minor updates on the profile requirements, updated parameter names, and references, which I omit from this talk here. So please go to the next slide. So if you just recall the ACE OAuth framework, which is taking the OAuth architecture, if you like, or the roles of OAuth to IoT by using proof of possession tokens. Then you have on this sequence of steps that you have the client, the authorization server, the resource server. The client is requesting access rights. The access token is provided to the client with also information about the resource server. And then the client is posting the access token to the resource server. It's authenticating. They are authenticating the client and resource server, and then you have the authorized access with protected communications. That's the basic flow, and the bold face or the what do you say, the edges of these boxes indicate that the communication is protected somehow. So we have some protection between C and AES, and then after authentication we also have some protection between C and RS. So what we have seen in, so this is also simplification, I should say. You can see the details in RFC 9200. So what we've seen in the existing ACE profiles, the DTLS profile and the OSCO profile, is some variants of this flow. And there are basically 2 types of variants. One is, which is, once you've done this flow, if you do, you can update the access rights without doing re-authentication. Or you can update the security context without updating the access rights. Typically, you do the latter by provisioning, or I mean, one instance of the latter is that you provision the access token together with within the authentication protocol. So this creates two different flows. And the reason for bringing this up now is I want to discuss these flows in the context of the ad hoc OSCO profile, which is the draft I'm talking about. So next slide, please. I'd like to go through A and B now in just quickly. So the case A here, updating access rights without re-authentication, is basically that you have already a security context is in place. You have gone through all the steps, and you want to extend or change the access rights somehow. Typically, extend the access rights. So the client is then essentially doing the same steps as first. It's requesting access rights, getting the access token, but you don't need to authenticate. So you just provision the new access token, and then that's protected with the existing context. So it's a slightly different part of the flow. Next slide. And here's the other variant, another variant of the flow where you do the provisioning of the access token within the authentication protocol. So you start with requesting the access rights, getting the access token, and then instead of separating the phase when you provision the access token and authenticate, you do them both at once. This is done in the DTLS profile using PSK identity. Another question is, what flows should we use in the ad hoc OSCOR profile? Next slide. So currently in version 0.1, we have the default flow, which is on the left-hand side. We have also a variant where we update the access rights without re-authentication. So it's basically the item A we saw on the previous slide. And for item B, we have essentially three different variants. We have the variant 1 here, which is combining, which is the provisioning the access token within the authentication protocol, in this case using external authorization data. We are also opting for the possibility to use ad hoc key update, which is the key update function defined in ad hoc when you can take an existing PRK out and derive a new PRK out without doing an exchange. It's basically just hashing or macking to a new key. And we have the third option of updating the security context by using kudos, a key update for OSCOR, which is then staying entirely on the OSCOR level. It's not involving ad hoc at all. And with all these options, this becomes a little bit more complicated. That was one of the comments we got from Christian, I think, for the last for the 0.0 version. So we'd like to make this simpler, and one starting point there is that we'd like to remove option B2, so the key update, which is a function that is optional with ad hoc. You don't have to implement it, might not be around, and if you just want to update the keys, you can get forward secrecy using kudos as well. If you just want to sort of without an additional without additional protocol messages, sorry, without an additional Diffie-Hellman, you can get forward secrecy anyway. So that's our first proposal here, and then we might think more about whether we could simplify this. I think that the symmetric key-based version of ad hoc will fit in nicely here because it provides an option for a lightweight update of the security context as well, rather than having to do the entire public key operation. So that's the state of things. I just wanted to share with you and see if there are any opinions on this. So B2 is probably gone by the next version, and we'll have another look at see if we can make things even simpler. And that's my final slide. I see no one in the queue, so I'm done. Thank you.
Any comments?
Yeah.
Okay, I will take this next one. Just a few ideas that we started to think through as follow-up activities. Next slide, please. Yeah, we started to think about a few things when working exactly on the ad hoc OSCOR profile. And we actually mentioned or even quickly discussed those in one interim meeting recently. We just noticed that this possible ideas go beyond the ad hoc profile. They can be even generalized to the whole framework. So just see things in this perspective, please. Next slide. Yeah, the first one would be a potential new workflow for the upload of the access token to the resource server in the first place. So normally, the client requests the access token and then uploads it, and then a protected request follows. But this alternative workflow would have the client still requesting the token, but then having the authorization server generating and also uploading the token itself to the resource server. And then, of course, coming back to the client, just confirming, well, the upload went okay. And also, please find, together with this confirmation, the usual RSC info you need. And then the client would just continue to the resource server, accessing the protected resources as per the access token. And we actually started to define this workflow in the IDOC profile. We even have a preliminary example in an appendix. But again, we realized this is not about the IDOC profile. This is about the framework, and it's applicable potentially to any profile. So it'd be good to have some work on this, we think. Next slide, please. But Göran first.
Sorry, I just wanted to add that this particular case has been proposed for lightweight M2M when the authorization server has contact with all the resource servers, and it's sort of it's straightforward to update the context on the resource server. So I think that's a good idea, and it simplifies the work for the constraint client.
Thanks, Göran. Next slide. Yeah, the second idea was about considering the introduction of some new parameters. And again, in the interest of the framework in general, a simple one was basically mentioned in the previous slide. It's in the interest of the new workflow, and it would be a parameter in the AS to client response to confirm that the upload of the access token by the AS worked fine or not. And that can be as simple as a Boolean token uploaded. But then we recently discussed also at the ACE interim the possibility to include an additional parameter again in the AS to client response in the interest of any profile that uses asymmetric authentication credential. So in the examples we have around, for example, in the DTLS profile, that message would include in the RSCNF parameter one public key for the single resource server associated to the target audience. But in principle, and that's submitted by the ACE framework in the first place, it's possible to have an audience that comprises multiple resource servers at once, related to a group token if you want to. But then you need to provide a client with the public keys of all the resource servers mapped to that audience, and that's not possible today. So it would be good to have an additional parameter, say RSCNF2, simply transported a set of such public keys. So the public keys of all the resource servers involved in that audience. And during the ACE metering, this was mentioned. Carsten raised the problem of how can the client distinguish which public key is which is associated to which resource server. And a possible way to address that would be having a companion parameter specifying some sort of identifier for those resource servers with the identifiers, for example, ordered in the same way of the public keys. But John has a comment.
Jonathan Eriksson, I'm just saying I'm very supportive to these optimizations of the message flow. The original message flows are not always very lightweight at all. You can also, I don't know what you can do exactly today, but you could have the same key for one key, but multiple resource servers. That's very common on the web. You have a certificate with many domain names.
Thank you. And next, final slide, I think. A third point. Yeah, this is not generic for the framework. This is specific for the DTLS and now also TLS profile. It has an asymmetric mode. And right now, the only admitted authentication credential is a cozy key as a raw public key. But again, in the IDOC profile, we are admitting new different kinds of asymmetric authentication credentials like certificates, for example, and we are also registering code points for new CWT confirmation methods to transport those consistent with what EDOC expects. But then the same thing, these same code points in particular can be reused also in the DTLS and TLS profile to admit the use of certificates, first of all, as authentication credentials in the DTLS profile. But thought from yesterday, we can do that just as well for CCS. That would be an alternative raw public key compared to cozy keys, just transporting also additional metadata. So this sounds like a minimal effort, actually.
John, again, I think this is very good. 3DPP has adopted ACE for DTLS and OSCORE, these two profiles. Some of the first immediate comment from 3D people was we need TLS for the and what about certificates? We like certificates. So I think the most important thing for ACE is to do these basic profiles and make them extend their usage. So I'm very supportive of this and would be willing to help.
Thank you, John. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is the last one. It's just a summary of the three new items to be better elaborated, of course. And as a rough thinking, I believe a single document can cover both 1 and 2. So the new workflow and the new parameters, whatever they are, in the interest of updating this framework, basically, while a separate second document can focus on point 3, which would be about updating the DTLS profile instead. I'll be willing to look for quotas, but yeah, I heard from John, he's especially interested in work covering point 3 here. And more comments and feedback, of course, are welcome. Thanks.
Daniel, we cannot hear you.
Yeah, so thanks, Marco. Then the next presentation is it's probably Melissa.
Hi, this is Militia. So I'll be presenting this draft, which talks about how to protect EST payloads with OSCORE. Next slide, please. So just to give you some context first, this is potential new work in ACE. We now have ad hoc that is nearing completion in the Lake working group. And one of the authentication methods of ad hoc is using static Diffie-Hellman keys. And to make full potential of ad hoc, we need a way to enroll these static Diffie-Hellman certificates. This is especially important because target ad hoc devices have an ad hoc OSCORE implementation. So now we want to leverage these implementations for the enrollment of certificates as well. And in the ACE working group, there was a document that was published as RFC 9148. It was published in April 2022, and it specifies the enrollment over secure transport with COAPS. This document follows closely the EST design, the RFC 7030, but it secures message exchanges with DTLS. But it profiles the EST for constrained environments. And essentially, this draft is well within the current scope of ACE, as you can see from the quoted sentence of the current ACE charter. Next slide, please. So about this draft, so we call it EST OSCORE. And this is an old draft that was first published in March 2017. That it was been laying around for a while, and it talks about how to protect EST payloads with OSCORE. It follows the structure of RFC 9148, but uses ad hoc and OSCORE instead of DTLS. And what is important to note here is that we had a previous in one of the previous interims when we were discussing EST CoAP-S, there was agreement to work on this draft, but to complete EST CoAP-S first. So now we believe this is the good time to revive this draft and to continue working on it. And in the latest update that we done for IETF116, we included support for the enrollment of static Diffie-Hellman keys. Next slide, please. So, in my opinion, this draft is non-controversial. As I said, it follows the structure of EST CoAP-S to the point, and just replaces the security protocols, the DTLS record layer with OSCORE, and it replaces DTLS handshake with ad hoc. And there is also the point in the overall architecture on the trust relation between the EST server and the register, where we actually improve over EST CoAP-S, because we can have OSCORE between the final two endpoints between the EST server and the EST client, because OSCORE provides can traverse proxies, CoAP proxies, when transported also over HTTP. Next slide, please. So this figure shows the protocol layering. As you can see, it's very straightforward. There are EST messages that are carried on top of OSCORE that can be carried over CoAP or HTTP, and that is further carried over UDP or TCP. And ad hoc is used on the side for mutual authentication before the actual message exchanges begin. Next slide, please. So in terms of the actual authentication, the EST OSCORE specifies that the EST client and EST server need to authenticate themselves, mutually authenticate using ad hoc. The authentication is based on certificates. We provide for a channel binding using an ad hoc, what we call ad hoc unique string, which it's a byte string that we generate using the ad hoc exporter function, and we add this byte string as a challenge password of the PKCS10 request in order to do the channel binding between the ad hoc channel and the actual object, PKCS object that is used for enrollment. We also define a couple of optimizations in this flow. In the flow that are optional, we combine ad hoc message tree and OSCORE request. We allow for the combining of these two as it is specified in the core OSCORE ad hoc draft. We allow for certificates that can be CBOR encoded, which is a work item in COSI. We allow for certificate, the reference of the certificate can be returned in the response of the PKCS10 object instead of the actual certificate in order for byte savings on the wire. Next slide, please. So this slide shows just that we follow completely the what has already been standardized in ACE in EST CoAP-S drafts, and these are the EST function, the endpoints that are provided. There is the CA certs endpoint, simple enrollment, simple re-enrollment, and so on. And we follow the normative text follows the EST CoAP-S draft, RFC. Next slide, please. So one point where we depart from EST CoAP-S is on the enrollment of static Diffie-Hellman keys, as I said, because this is one of the authentication methods of ad hoc that needs to be supported. And this is the most efficient ad hoc authentication method in terms of message size. So we define essentially we have a section on how to enroll certificates using static Diffie-Hellman keys, and the procedure is as follows. First, the client obtains the CA's Diffie-Hellman key using CA certs endpoint, or abbreviated CRTS. the client then generates the Diffie-Hellman key pair following the Diffie-Hellman group parameters of the CA, and then we reuse, actually this is already standardized in 6955, which is an old RFC, the proof of possession using static Diffie-Hellman keys, which the client follows in order to sign the PKCS10 object. So essentially it generates a MAC, and it uses the OSCOR, KDF, and MAC algorithms to generate this message authentication code and to generate the proof of possession of the private key that wants to be enrolled. Next slide, please. So in terms of the next steps, so we still have some sections to complete in the draft. So this is, but we are very much looking for reviews, and we would welcome any reviews for this draft in order to advance it in ACE. Yes, Marco?
Marco Tiloka, I'm happy to see this draft coming back. I support this. I will review.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments on? Yeah.
I just have one question. When you say we, is if this document got adopted by the working group, do you? I mean, who is we? Who is gonna lead that work?
So yes, I took the action point on reviving this draft, and there is an author, and there is an active author list that we are having private exchanges on the draft. So when I say we, I consider the co-authors of the draft.
Okay. Well, one of the thing I mean, just to be very clear, one of the thing I'm trying to avoid is that to have one author being committed to too many documents. So if you were taking the lead, that would be easier for
yes,
you
yes.
can
So
talk to
I'm
the
taking
others.
the lead
that,
on yes. So
okay,
yes,
right.
yes, I'm taking the lead on this draft. So
okay, good. Yeah,
I can commit on
so
this.
so I suspect that the next step is a call for adoption, and we can start from that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so it's probably time for any other business. Do we have anything to say that we haven't said earlier?
Paolo, sorry, I forgot to check in on the list. Just a comment on earlier, you mentioned the CMPv2 co-op transport draft. Just a note that I did my AD review. I received comments only 2 weeks ago in the form of an XML file, which I then have to process and run a diff against things to see if the issues I raised are addressed. So just and then of course obviously I had a week of vacation before IETF, and then it was IETF.
So yeah, no. I mean, that's
too much time to do it. But as a general note, if you're asking feedback from me on certain text, please just send an email with old text, new text that I can quickly reply to, or directly do a new draft in a data tracker, so I can just click into the data tracker and see a diff side by side, because it's really important I can sort of tick off issues quickly and not have to gather my my command line tools to see what happened for a diff. And that actually really improves my workflow, because if you send me things in email and I okay them, I still have a work item, right? I still need to ensure that these items actually get into the draft and aren't forgotten. So by going through email, you kind of double the work. So where possible, please use draft versions. They're really cheap. Nobody will think that you're doing too many draft versions. Just push it into the data tracker, and then we can actually track the data really well.
Okay, right. So what I get is that you prefer to limit the email exchanges.
Sorry, I missed what was that. Daniel, could you repeat?
Oh, so what I get from Paul comments is that he prefers to limit the email exchanges, but rather to point at a new version of the draft in the data tracker.
If these are Yes, but I mean, if it's a short
Okay.
question, just shoot me an email. It's fine. But make
Yeah,
sure
yeah,
that the email stands on its own, so that I can open the email, respond to it, without
Okay,
like
right.
doing too many different things.
Okay, right. So, right. Okay, fine. So now just for the other documents, so I think the CMPv2 is under review by Paul. So that's just one thing I wanted to make sure. The other draft that I would like not to fall in the crack, because it's a one that is a little bit isolated, and I regularly got a ping from the authors, is the heap draft, so CoAP heap. And this one is independent, so you can't start having a look. I mean, it's not relying on any other documents. And we also had the two GroupCom drafts that are now being published, and but this is a harder piece, I guess.
Yeah, Paul speaking. Yeah, just to I guess inform everybody else. You can look at my queue on the data tracker, but basically my top items right now are ad hoc and the ACE group documents. So those are the top of my queue to get out before new items from this week get into my new queue.
Okay, right. Okay, so any other comments? I think that's pretty all. So thank you for the Lake chairs to handle that. And see everyone at the next interim meeting then. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, bye.